Would you like to grow the jade plant? It's a great plant for any gardener's collection, and it's very easy to grow. It also has some hidden meaning. It's known as the friendship plant and the luck plant and the fortune plant. So it's an interesting gift with value and meaning for your friends. But if you want to grow it and keep it healthy, you need to know 3 things. You need to learn what it likes, give it what it wants, and get ready for it to grow. Let's get started. The jade is native to Mozambique and South Africa. The temperatures range from 50 to about 85 degrees. The climate is arid. The rain is unpredictable and drought is frequent. Now it grows on dry, rocky hillsides in the shade of tall grasses and other succulents. And so this tells us some interesting things about the jade. It would make a great indoor plant because it likes those warmer climates. It also would grow well outdoors during the warm spring, summer, and fall. It likes it dry, so it's not going to want a lot of water. And because it grows in that dry, rocky soil, it needs a particular kind of soil that will be very well draining. In its native environment, it can grow 10 to 12 feet tall, which is quite extraordinary for this particular plant. And we rarely see that happen in the home or in the home landscape because we're growing them in pots. When they're in the ground, they have a lot more room for the roots to grow and get established. If you're looking for a healthy jade to buy, you're going to want to look at the leaves first. And you want to see that they are plump and kind of stiff. If they're a little bit mushy, if you can bend them, if you see some pruning on the leaves, that's not a healthy plant. That's a plant that hasn't been watered consistently. You want to look at the stems of the plant. And the stems should be upright and straight. If you notice that the stems are long and leggy, if they're a little bit bent, if they're entirely green instead of brown, that's a sign that the plant hasn't had quite the right sunlight, and that's not a plant you would want to select. You want to check out the soil of the plant. It should be dry, and you can jiggle it a little bit. You want to make sure that those roots are well established, because if it's a plant that has been watered too much, if the soil is wet, the roots will begin to rot. And when you shake it, you're going to be able to tell that there's a lot of movement, and that's a sign that the roots are beginning to rot, and that's not a plant you would want to select either. You want to look at the leaves for damage. Insects can cause particular kinds of streaks on the leaves. There are some insects that can chew on the leaves, and sometimes they'll develop spots. And all of these indicators are of a plant that's had some kind of distress, some kind of damage, and probably is not the plant that you want to buy. In terms of soil for the jade plant, if you're bringing it indoors, you want to use a sterile potting mix. You can buy the standard potting mix for succulents and cacti, but it can get pretty expensive. And so if you want to spend a little bit less, you can get a potting mix, not a potting soil. A potting mix is a sterile soil that makes it great to bring into the house, so you won't have any fungi or bacteria going on when you bring it into your house. But you will want to add an amendment that will help the soil to be very well drained. You can use perlite, or you can use sand, or you can use lava sand or a pumice. All of these amendments will add to the potting soil and cause it to drain more quickly, and that will provide a better home for the roots of your jade plant. Now, jades like to be very dry. They can go up to a month at a time without any water. And the reason they can do that is because of these plump leaves and stems on the plant. They store water there, and when the soil gets dry, they use the water that they have stored inside the plant. So The worst thing you can do with your jade is water it too much. Now, I don't let mine go for a month at a time. They can, but I don't put that kind of pressure on them regularly. But when I'm looking at my jade to water it, I'm actually sticking my finger in the soil. And if it is a little bit damp, even a little bit damp on the top of the soil, about the top inch of the soil, don't water it. It does not need a drink, and too much water can cause it to rot. In its native environment, jade can take 8 hours of sun, and that's a lot of sun for jade plants in the home environment. In fact, most jades that we buy, the tag says bright indirect light. And what that tells me is that this plant is very adaptable in terms of sunlight. They can take a lot of sun, or they can take almost no sun, but the key there is that they adapt to that environment. If you buy a jade that has been in the store and has been receiving indirect light, if you bring it home and put it in the sun because it's adaptable, it's going to burn. You have to gradually ease it into the sun over a period of several days and maybe even several weeks. Because when you suddenly change a plant from very low sun to a whole lot of sun, they burn just like we burn. Those skin on the leaves will sunburn and it will turn brown, and the leaf can actually die. It can kill the plant. So when you want to adapt your jade to a little bit different sunlight, you want to do that slowly and give it time to adapt. Now, there are many jades that have a red cast to the leaves. In fact, if you look carefully, this one has just a tiny bit of red cast to the leaves. And this can happen with the Botany Bay jades. They have the ability to protect themselves from sunlight by changing to this red color. And some of those jades are spectacularly red. And it does that when the plant is under stress, receiving a little bit too much sunlight, and it is a survival technique for the jade plants. Now, not all of them will turn red, but a lot of them will, and if that's what you're looking for, you'll need to look for those specific varieties that have that red characteristic, like the Botany Bay. The jade is in the genus Crassula and the species Ovata, and there are many, many cultivars within that genus and species. Most of them have this upright appearance with the thick stalks that make them grow sort of like a tree would grow, but there are also many varieties of jade that look nothing like a tree. Here I have the tricolor jade, and it's been getting quite a bit of shade, so the color's not very unique, but if I was getting a little bit more sun, you would see the white, you would see the yellow streaks, you'd even see some pink streaks going on in the tricolor jade. With my tricolor jade, it's outside spring, summer, and fall. And because of the position of the sun, it gets quite a bit of sun in the spring and summer, and it's very bright, vibrant with those colors. And in the fall, when the sun slips over in the sky a little bit, this plant gets more shade. So what you're seeing is that tricolor jade in the shade. This is the Botany Bay jade. It has much more of a bushy shape to it, and it has those leaves that will take on the red cast all around the tips of the leaves when it gets a little bit more sunlight. This one's one of my favorites, and I've had it for the longest of all of my jades. This is a Crosby's compact jade, and you can see that the leaves are much more slim. It does take on a red cast. You can see it on just a few of the leaves, but it has a little bit more of a compact shape because those leaves are shaped just a bit differently. This is the Gollum jade, and yeah, that's that character from the Lord of the Rings series, and it has a very unique shape to the leaves with a little cup inset into the leaves. And this is one that I wanted to talk with you about pruning for. This particular jade got some damage in a hailstorm, and so it's lost quite a few of its leaves on the lower aspect of the stem, and it's about to get very long and leggy because of the damage on that plant. Now, jades love to be pruned. When you prune a jade, it stimulates new growth. It causes that stem to branch, so it makes a full bushy growth on the top of the plant, and that's what makes it look like a tree. The jade is also very popular for bonsais. It can be shaped and molded in any way you like with those bonsai methods, and it grows with a very shallow root, so it makes it a great option for a bonsai. But for this little golem, I want it to flesh out with more growth. I don't want these limbs to get taller and start leaning because they're trying to deal with the weight out on the end of the stem. And so how you prune a jade, now you can see on this limb there's a stem going this way and there's a stem going this way, and that's because it was pruned at this point. And when you prune it, it causes two leaves, two nodes to come out and produce a branch like a tree would branch. And so what I'm going to do is take this stem and I'm going to prune it right above the node. And the node is where you see the seam in the stem, and it's where there's a leaf attached. And when you cut right above that node, it stimulates that node to produce two stems. It also stimulates the node below the damage, and so we'll have leaves coming out here and here because of the damage right there. And I'm going to do the same thing on this stem. I'm going to put it just a little bit higher so that they'll have room to grow in two different levels of the plant. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to prune it right above these two leaves. And then I'm going to do it again here. And then on this one, I'm going to take it all the way back to right here. And then the last one, I'm going to take it right here. And so this pruning will cause branches here, here, there, there, and over here in 3 different places. So within a few weeks, this is going to start flushing out again with new growth. Now we do have some little cuttings here, and I'm going to tell you about propagating your jade plant. Most jades have expired on their patent that prohibits propagation. Most of the common jades can easily be propagated. And to do that, you take the stem that you cut off, and you're going to want to leave this stem sitting out in the open air for 2 or 3 days. And the point of that is for the stem to dry out and grow a callus. And from that callus, it will grow roots. If it never forms a callus, it will simply rot. And so you need to have a long stem piece to set into the soil. And so you might want to take off a few leaves. And removing leaves from a succulent is a bit tricky. You don't want it to break. You want it to actually remove at the seam. And so you just gently work it back and forth, twist it a little bit. And don't rush it, because you want it to break right at the seam. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. There we go. And so this will sit out in the air for 2 or 3 days. And once it's had time to callus, you want to use a potting mix that is sterile. You want to add some perlite or pumice or sand or lava sand to it so that it'll be well drained. And you simply rest it in the soil up to the first leaf. and you're going to leave it dry. Don't water it, leave it dry for a couple of weeks. Now, if you notice that the little leaves start to prune, if they start to wilt, that's a sign that it's definitely time to give it a drink. But otherwise, give it a week or two before you begin to water it. And then when you do begin to water it lightly so that it stays moist on the top of the soil, but it's not completely dripping in the bottom of the soil. But you want to keep it moist around that stem for a little while so it will have some time to root. And once you notice it putting on a few leaves, then you can begin treating it like a normal, healthy jade plant. But while it's in this stage where it's growing roots, you're going to want to keep it in the shade, and you're going to want to keep it a little bit moist most of the time. You will let it dry out a little bit in between waterings, but keeping it moist will help stimulate that root growth from the callus. In terms of caring for a jade, in the early spring, you can begin to fertilize it. And because jade is a succulent, it does need a 50% potency for your fertilizer. You use half as much and you use it half as often. And so for the jade, you would fertilize it once in the early spring and then once again in the summer with a 50% fertilizer. And if you use those time-release granules, then twice a year is enough for fertilizing. Now, if you're using a spray fertilizer, you would mix it at a 50% mix, and you could use that spray once every 3 weeks. In the spring is also when you want to do your pruning. Any routine pruning that you need to do happens first thing in the spring. In the late fall and winter, the jade goes almost completely dormant. The recommendation is that you stop watering them on a regular basis in mid-September. And you can let them go for 2 or 3 weeks or even up to a month with no water during those winter months because they are dormant, and keeping that soil a little bit too moist can really cause them to have some problems in their growth pattern. In the wintertime is when the jade can bloom. And I'll tell you, we rarely see them blooming in the home environment, but that's because we're not giving them a particular kind of treatment that they have in their native environment. So if you want to see your jade bloom, here's what you need to do. In the spring and summer, you need to use a foliar fertilizer and fertilize them every 3 weeks through the spring and summer. And you need to water them regularly. When you notice that the soil is very dry, go ahead and give them a deep drink that soaks the soil and it runs out the bottom of the pot. That way there's an opportunity for all of the soil to get wet when you do water it, and then let it dry out again. And if you think about that native environment, it's really, really dry, but when it rains a lot. So it would have completely soaked the soil, and that's the situation that you're mimicking when you water your plants and then you let them dry out again. Now in September, you stop watering your jade completely. Don't water it at all after September. And it needs to be placed in a little bit cooler environment, like 50 to 60 degrees is ideal. A cool garage might do this, a cool greenhouse might do this, but that temperature is important. And the other thing that's important is the shorter day cycle. Now September is leading into fall, and it's a short cycle, so depending on where you live in the world, that may or may not be true, but it needs a very short a very short day cycle. And within 2 to 3 months of being in that cool temperature with that short day cycle with completely dry soil, this plant will go completely dormant, and that will stimulate the blooms. And the blooms will be coming out all over this plant in clusters of little star-shaped flowers that have sort of a pinkish white color. And if you've ever seen a jade in full bloom, it is quite spectacular. Now, once the blooms begin to fade, that's when you can give it a drink, and you can start watering it a little more frequently. But you don't want to get it back on that spring watering cycle until spring actually arrives. So once the weather warms up and the days get a little longer, you can begin to water it regularly. You can begin to fertilize it once every 3 weeks with that foliar fertilizer. And you can also prune it. Get all of the flower stalks off, give it a little cut on the tips so that you'll have some branching, and it will give it a very full shape. And that will be something that your friends and neighbors have never seen before if you can get your plant to do that in the wintertime. Now let's take a look at what's happening below the soil. I'm using this with one of my smaller plants because the more you take a plant in and out of the pot, the more you have the opportunity to damage the upper part of the plant. The leaves are very fragile. If you bump them too much, they're going to break and they're going to fall off. And so when you're taking it out of the pot, you want to brace it against your hand, and you want to support the weight of the plant at the base of the plant, at the stem. And you'll notice a lot of the soil has fallen away because jades have a very shallow root system. In fact, most succulents have a very shallow root system. They don't really need a deep pot. They need a shallow pot. And their roots are very fibrous. They're brown. They blend in with the soil very well. And you can tell where the soil is holding together. The roots are very dense in this area. Here's some where you can see the roots of the plant. So they're very fragile. If there's no dirt on them, you can see this one's kind of a cream color. But it doesn't take much to damage the roots of a succulent plant. And so there are definitely times when you need to look at the roots to make sure that they're healthy, but you want to do that rarely. The best kind of pot to use with a jade is a terracotta pot, and it can be a decorative one or just a simple terracotta. And the reason is that terracotta is porous and the water evaporates out the sides of the pot, and it just helps to maintain that very dry environment. Now with my jades, I'm repotting them and reusing them in interesting situations that I'm going to show you in just a minute. So mine rarely get root bound in a pot, but if you have yours growing in a pot and you have it there for a year or 2 or 3 in the same pot, you're going to notice that the roots start growing out the bottom of the pot, and that's your sign that it is getting root bound in that pot. And that's when you're going to definitely want to take it out, get a little bit larger pot, mix some soil with some extra perlite or sand to make it drain really well, and situate it in a new pot. But know that it doesn't have to be the normal shaped pot. Because they have very shallow roots, you can put them in some very interesting situations. In some shallow pots that are wider than you would think they need, and then you can combine them with other plants. As long as the pot is deep enough to accommodate the root of your jade, you can put them in any kind of shaped pot that you like. And you can combine them with 2 other plants and give them a nice container garden feel that's not just one spotlighted plant, but 2 or 3 plants that complement one another. And sometimes when I have a little extra room rather than a plant, I want to have something just a little bit whimsical. Just a suggestion that maybe somebody's going to come have a seat in the shade of my little jade and have a little tea party there. If you keep your terracotta pots very long, you know that occasionally a weak spot will get in the clay. It will develop, and if you pick up your plant by the edge of the pot to move it somewhere else, sometimes that part of the pot will just fall right out, which is exactly what happened in this pot. And it is the inspiration for some of my broken pot gardens, and most of those broken pot gardens are my terracotta pots that developed a weak spot. Now for this plant, I just put that piece into the pot, and there's a little bit of soil going on right here, but it still holds the container garden together, and it adds such a great deal of interest to the garden when you can be creative with that broken piece. And if I had some little sedum, I could actually have some sedum growing out the side here, and it would be a very interesting container garden. Now most of my container gardens with succulents are in this particular way. This one I specifically created out of a series of broken pots, and so my jade is the high point at the top of the container garden, but there's all kinds of interesting little succulents coming in and out of the pot, and so broken pots are a common thing in my garden. Now this one is an interesting example of a visitor coming that I was not expecting. You can see my jade coming out the top and some little graptophyllums coming out the side, and right in the middle is a periwinkle. Apparently one of my periwinkle seeds dropped into my pot here, and it took root, and it started growing and trailed out all by itself. And apparently a periwinkle doesn't have to have as much water as I thought, because I haven't watered this plant any differently based on the fact that I had a visitor coming to my container garden. So happy accidents are a wonderful thing in the garden. I hope I've inspired you to go find a jade plant and grow it in your own garden, and possibly share it with your friend with that special meaning in mind. So consider sharing with your friends, and subscribe and like, and if you have a question, please leave a comment. I'll be happy to answer it. And I'll see you next time on The Handcrafted Garden.